Hello everyone. So I'm going to be doing challenge activity 7.8.2 nested loops print seats. This one's a little difficult, so I'm just going to work through it live and do the problem. So the question is asking for us to do basically print all of row 1, all of row 2, all of row 3, and then all of the seats in each row. So you have num rows 2. Yeah, so this is the rows and this is the columns. So if there's 2 rows and 3 columns, then there's going to be 1A, 1B, 1C, and 2A, 2B, 2C, because it's A, B, C are the 3 columns and 1 and 2 are the 2 rows, right? So immediately when you see this kind of pattern where you have something that stays the same and then the second part ticks up, and the first part changes and the second part ticks up, and then it continued like 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C, 3A, 3B, 3C, dot dot dot. Whenever you see this kind of pattern, what you should immediately think is I need 2 loops. One loop inside of another loop. So let's just do that. I prefer 4 loops, especially because the way the book describes it is you want to use a while loop when you don't know how many times you're going to be looping. And you want to use a for loop whenever you do know how many times you're going to be looping. And while a for loop might be a little confusing right now, I think that for loops, when you can use them, you should, because they're actually easier to read once you have a little bit more experience. Like, that's just personally how I feel. I love looking at for loops, and when I look at a while loop, I have to it takes twice as long to understand what the loop is doing. So we're going to have one loop, int I something, something, something. We're going to have a second loop inside, which is int j, something, something. Okay. So we're going to have our first loop be our rows. And our rows are really easy. So if we have, let's say num rows is equal to 2, then we just have to have count row 1 and row 2, right? If num rows is 10, then we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So we're going to be starting at 1. We're trying to get I to be less. We're only going to loop while I is less than or equal to the number of rows. And after every loop, we're going to increment I by 1. Okay? So what this will do is it'll loop through from 1 to num rows. And if the num rows is 0 or negative, then it will never loop. So you should think about cases like that. Like, what if they enter a negative number? Well, then this loop will never be accessed, so it will output nothing except a new line, right? So that's fine. And what if they output a really big number? Well, it's going to loop a lot, but it'll still work. Okay, so now the second one's where it gets tricky. I don't know if the way that I did it is actually the best way to do it, but it worked. So I think I'm going to do it the way that I did it, just so you can see it. And then maybe I'll try a different way, and then we'll run both and see which one works. So the tricky thing here is that you want to start not at 1. You're doing letters, right? So you can't start at like 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 or negative 1,000. You have to start at A. But remember, I actually have a ASCII chart right here. I just looked up Java ASCII table on the internet. So we're only using capital letters. So our A is 41, and notice that as we go up 1, we're going from A plus 1 is B, B plus 1 is C, C plus 1 is D, on and on and on all the way to Z. So we can use this same for loop construction, incrementing by 1, just starting actually at the letter A. Okay, does that make sense? So let's do, well, I think this is the way that I did it. I did int j equals typecasting int to a, and j is less than or equal to int, let's do int a plus num columns minus 1 plus j. And then, well, I'll come back to this in a second. So basically, once we understand that we're looping through the start at the first row, and then we do all the columns, then we do go increment up the row, and then all the columns. All we have to do is each one time we loop through here, we have to just print out what we're at currently. So that would be system.out.print, and then we have I plus, let's just put an empty string just to make sure we don't do addition, plus char j plus. Okay, so what this is doing, remember that the way that I'm doing this is I'm trying to keep everything the same type. So I'm keeping I'm keeping j as an integer. So I'm converting a, the letter a, as our starting value, just like we use 1 as our starting value, into an integer so I can save it as a j. And then what we're checking for is that j is less than or equal to the letter that is a plus the number of columns minus 1. And the reason it's minus 1 is because if we have like a is 1, if you think about it like that. So minus 1 will just go back to 0, and then plus num columns is the amount of columns. Okay? So I don't even think I had a minus 1 here, but we'll see. And then plus j, so that we're incrementing through the letters. So I think this will work the way it is right now. Let's see together and see what I did wrong, or if I did anything wrong. I feel like I did this totally wrong. Oh, no, I didn't. So the way I did it worked. I casted a to an integer, and then I added the number of columns minus 1. This is really the hang up. Once you understand what a typecast is even doing, like when I cast the letter capital A into an integer, I'm just, where did I put that? Oh, I removed it. Anyway, I'm taking a, like I think if I just create a quick ASCII chart, it goes like A equals 41, B equals 42, C equals 43, dot dot dot, up to Z equals something, right? So when I cast A to an integer, I'm getting out 41. And so if I increment that integer here by 1, I'm really getting, if I convert it back to a char, a character, it would be 42, which would convert back to a B, right? So it's just a little tricky with the conversions. And then, okay, so let's say that I'll try and explain the number of columns minus 1. So now that we understand int a, remember that we're starting from int a. Just like here, we're starting from 1, right? So to convert number of columns into a number that we can compare j against, we have to start at a by adding that to the number of columns and subtract 1. So if we had the number of columns as 3, then if we're starting at a, let's put d here too. And e equals 45. So we're starting at a. Let's say that we we add 3. We had 3. We're looking at a case where we have 3 columns. So let's say we add 3. 1, 2, 3. Oh, we're at D. But our 3 columns should just be A, B, and C. So that's why we subtract 1 to get back to here. So I'm actually going to try a different approach here. I'm going to try something without so many typecasts. I'm going to try if we do... I don't know if this will work. Char j equals A. J is less than or equal to A plus... I'm going to try this. So I don't know what happens if you increment a character. I don't know if that'll just work. I don't necessarily know what'll happen if you add a character to a number, if that'll implicitly cast the type to an integer and then we just convert back to a char. Or let's even try this without any of this. Let's just try it like this. Without any cast at all. Let's see if this works. Oh, I actually don't have to cast here anymore. This would just be J. Oh, forgot about that. Hello? Okay. Yep, this actually works too. So this addition here will implicitly take A, and when you add something to it, it converts it to an integer. And then it stays an integer. Minus 1 is just subtracting 1 from an integer. Setting J to A is fine, obviously, and incrementing a character by 1, because I think that will, if you take this plus plus J, this is really saying J equals J plus 1. So if J is a character, then just like here, it'll take a character. This character J equals a character plus 1, then it becomes an int, and we're assigned to a character, so we typecast it back to a character. So you can do this without any typecast at all by just starting at A, going until you get to num columns minus 1 plus A, and just incrementing J as you go. So okay, that was a little complicated. I chose this one because it was hard. So if you need help with anything, or you don't understand what I'm doing, I mean, I barely understand what I'm doing, so but I'll answer any questions if you have any. So thank you. Have a nice day.